Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Road Safety Capacity Building Program. Thanks so much for coming in. We'll just wait till the top of the hour, 5 more minutes, and we will begin the session. Thank you. Hi everyone, welcome into the Road Safety Capacity Building Program. We'll just wait another couple of minutes to allow people to enter into the platform and we will commence proceedings. Thank you and see you in a moment. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome into this Road Safety Capacity Building Program. I'll just move my slide along. This is the second module of this program and we're focusing on safer road users. My name is Blaise Murford. I'm really delighted to be here with you right throughout this course to help moderate these sessions. And I should, at this point, also acknowledge that this course is brought to you by a number of different partners. Primarily, it's brought to you by the Asian Development Bank, the Transport Sector Group, the Asia Pacific Road Safety Observatory, the Global Road Safety Partnership, and also the International Road Assessment Program. And it is made possible through the support of a range of donors, which include the Global Road Safety Facility at the World Bank, UK Aid, and the Asian Development Bank. So really delighted to have you here for this module that will last the next few weeks and starting today with our first sessions. Okay, just a couple of housekeepings before I move on to the formal welcomes. The first is that we definitely do encourage your interaction throughout the presentations. Primarily, this will occur through the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom application. Please do use this to write any questions or comments that you might have through any of the presentations, and we will try and bring those up as we get to the end of each of the sessions. Also, at times, the presenters might ask for you to write into this box in response to some questions. So please do use that Q&A function anytime you like for any questions and comments throughout. I'm also delighted to say that Russian translation is available throughout this entire module. To access this, please go again to the bottom of your Zoom application and click the interpretation icon. And from here, you can select Russian, where we have our fantastic translators there who are translating everything through to Russian there. So please use that if you need it. And of course, we also encourage you to interact with us again through the questions and answers, even if it's in Russian language, and we can, of course, have our interpreters assist. A certificate of attendance will be issued upon completion of this module, which involves attending the webinars and also completing a homework assignment, which I will talk about in a moment. And you will be receiving all links to presentations that are delivered through this particular module. Okay, so just a brief overview of this module. I'm really excited. We've got some fantastic speakers to talk and engage with you throughout these few sessions. So today we're starting and kind of getting an overview of understanding the risks related to road users from Dr. Judy Fleiter at GRSP. We'll then have Greg Kraft and Jimmy Tang from the Asia Injury Prevention Foundation talking about vulnerable road users. On Thursday, we move through to presentations focusing on enforcement and also strategic communications. Presenters from, again, GRSP and also Vital Strategies. And then from next week, we'll move into our more practical sessions. These are 2-hour sessions where we'll really get down and detailed into how to implement evidence-based approaches. So you can see there, we've got a dedicated session to this. Of course, our homework assignment, which is really, I guess, enabling or introducing to you some good approaches to addressing safer road users. And we'll give you all the details of that on Thursday. And then we'll finish this particular module on October 21st, where a range of our experts will provide feedback to you from those homework assignments and engage in a really detailed discussion about your ideas and how that interacts with best practice through the region and globally. Okay, so with that, I'm now going to pass over for some brief welcome remarks. First, I would like to welcome Dave Shelton, who's Senior Transport Specialist focusing on road safety at the Asian Development Bank. Dave, over to you.
Thank you, Blaise. And on behalf of the ADB, I'd like to welcome everybody to this second module in the Asia Pacific Road Safety Observatory's Road Safety Capacity Building Program. In this module, we'll focus on road user safety. The program is very practical in its orientation. We focus more on implementation than we do on theory. And that's because road safety is all about taking action. We save lives through the actions we take. So the program is unapologetically about taking action. We're here to support you taking action in executing what is needed and in doing it successfully. Taking action is an especially complex task when people's behaviours are involved. The safe system domains of vehicle safety and infrastructure safety just seems so much simpler taken from this vantage point. I personally started working in road safety in infrastructure and later moved to road user safety. We were implementing graduated licensing systems, advanced policing enforcement activities, school education, those sorts of programs, a lot of promotional activity. And suddenly there were teams of psychologists, behavioral scientists, human-centered designers. It was a very different world to what I had been used to. Of course, our long-term vision is that the safe system will not place excessive expectations on human behaviour. The road system itself will be self-explaining, forgiving, and protective. However, during the intervening decades until we reach that time, road safety is heavily reliant on road users being knowledgeable, aware, and responsible. This is very, very important work. Thankfully, we have a large and growing body of knowledge on what works in road user safety, and we've got some terrific speakers in the course over the coming weeks. This is, of course, an introductory course, and I encourage you to continue to reach for new knowledge and to use action-based learning as your guide. So let me congratulate you as road safety practitioners from across Asia and the Pacific. I congratulate you for setting aside the time to undertake this program, and I congratulate you for the work that you will have already done in road safety. And I wish you success in both in the future. Thanks, Blaise.
Thank you very much, Dave, and thanks so much again to ADB and the Asia Pacific Road Safety Observatory for hosting and leading this capacity building program. Okay, now I just want to pass over to you, Dave Cliff, the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Road Safety Partnership, for a brief welcome on behalf of GRSP. Dave.
Thanks, Blaise, and thanks to you, Dave, for your words, which really echo precisely what I was going to say. This is a very operationally focused course, and if you look at the speakers, they're all people who've been heavily involved in the implementation of road safety related projects all around the world. Over the last 20 years since the Global Road Safety Partnership has been operating, the evidence base as to what works has really been honed. We do know what works and we know what doesn't work. And over the course of the next few weeks, we'll be able to talk you through some very practical examples from a range of jurisdictions that really have made a significant difference to reducing the number of people who are killed and seriously injured in road crashes. So we'll be talking about enforcement, public awareness programs, the risks that are faced by road users, the importance of crash data, performance monitoring. So I look forward to later in the program being able to talk to you about these things in a little bit more detail and to give you some ideas and examples of what we know works. While a lot of the examples will come from high-income countries, the GRSP has been running these programs in a range of low and middle-income countries right around the world. So we know these things work right across the spectrum in different countries. So thank you very much, and I look forward to joining you during other segments later on this week and over coming weeks. Thanks, Blaise, and back to you.
Thanks, Dave. In fact, thanks both Daves for your welcome remarks, and again, a warm welcome to everybody. Okay, I'm going to pass over now to Dr. Judy Flight, who's the Global Program Manager for GRSP, who's going to deliver the first of the presentations. However, just a quick reminder that we do have two things available to you. We have interpretation for those who are requiring it, so please use that at the bottom of your Zoom and select Russian if you require that interpretation. And a reminder as well, we have our Q&A box there, so in case you have any questions or comments, please put them in there and we will attempt to have our experts address those throughout the course of today. Okay, so with that, let me now pass over to Dr. Judy Flight. Judy.
Thank you very much, Blaise. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Just confirming, Blaise, you can hear and see the presentation, okay?
Yes, thank you.
Lovely, thanks very much. I add my congratulations, actually, to those of you who have made it through to Module 2. It's a pleasure to be with you again, presenting on behalf of the Global Road Safety Partnership today, and many of my GRSP colleagues are involved in this second module. It was wonderful to be part of Module 1, and welcome back to those of you who are coming back to Module 2, and perhaps we have a few new people joining. So my presentation is going to cover the issues relating to understanding risks that we face on the road as road users, But a brief reminder, those of you that were with us in Module 1, some of these slides, a few of these slides today will look familiar because I've chosen to highlight some of the key points from the last module, at least from my perspective. So a reminder that in the time that it takes you to wash your hands, every 24 seconds, we lose a life to a road crash somewhere in the world. So I'd like you to keep that in mind as we focus our attention on how to save more lives on the world's roads. Clearly, there is a lot of work to be done if we're losing one person every 24 seconds. So today, I'm going to briefly revisit the safe system approach and talk about it from the perspective of road users, since that is the focus of Module 2. Spend a little bit of time covering the topics of risk and exposure, and then just briefly touch on this concept of vulnerable road users before I will happily hand over the discussion of vulnerable road users for more detail to our colleagues from the Asia Injury Prevention Foundation. We're delighted to have them on today's webinar as well. So you will remember this image, and you have probably seen this in many places, one of the depictions of the safe system approach. And a reminder that at the heart of this concept is the idea that we as people, our bodies can only tolerate so much before injury occurs to our body. And so that's the guiding principle. We need to be thinking about designing a transport system that allows for human frailty and that allows for us when we make an error, because as human beings, we will inevitably make a mistake at some point while we're using the road. And we want the system to be able to account for that error without it meaning that that person loses their life. So the safe people quadrant is the one that we're focusing on in Module 2. The other three parts being safe speeds, safe roads and infrastructure, and safe vehicles. And you heard Dave Shelton allude to those in his opening remarks today. So of the four elements, our Module 3, the next module, will be looking at road infrastructure. But what we're hoping for is that the roads will be forgiving when we make an error, because we will inevitably make an error while we're using the road. We want safe speeds, safe enough so that when we make an error, our body is not compromised to a point where damage occurs and we suffer a fatal injury. For vehicles, we want the vehicle to be able to avoid a crash or a collision if possible. And if not possible, we want that vehicle to protect us as well as possible. And so that brings me to the fourth element, which is the focus of this module, safe people. We want people to be alert and compliant with traffic laws. I think I heard Dave Shelton mention we want road users to be knowledgeable. We want them to know about what risks they face, and we want them to be responsible in their road use. And so overall, bringing those four things together, we want our interactions on the road network to be safe. So here is a question. I have a series of 3 questions that I would like you to consider. And if you could just briefly type a response if something comes to your mind. Who is at risk on the roads in your country? Doesn't need to be a lengthy response, just the first thing you think of when you think about that question. Who is at risk on the roads in your country? If you could type a brief response into the Q&A box, I'd be grateful. And I will ask my colleague Blaise to help me to read out a few of those so we can keep your responses in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation. So who is at risk on the roads in your country?
Sorry, Judy, I was definitely on mute. So some are coming through already. Mohammed Jonal has mentioned pedestrians and people who are crossing the roads. Brent has mentioned all road users. A number of people mentioning pedestrians. Stanley has mentioned anyone that is any part of the road infrastructure or in its vicinity. Songrit has mentioned motorcyclists, pedestrians and bike riders is mentioned. Children, Victoria has mentioned. All road users. Pongsatorn has mentioned motorcyclists and cyclists. Any other road users, Samita has mentioned. Yep, this is a brief snapshot, Judy.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful, Blaise. Thanks, everyone, for those suggestions. And it shows me that you're thinking about perhaps people who are incredibly vulnerable. You've talked about children, you've talked about pedestrians, you've talked about motorcyclists. None of those people are protected by a shell, a vehicle shell. Some of you mentioned everybody. And when we talk about unsafe speeds and the damage that can be done in a collision to our bodies, if the speed is too high and the impact forces are too strong, then yes, every single person is at risk of an injury. I have another question for you. Please do the same thing, some brief responses in the Q&A box. Who is most at risk on the roads in your country? Who is most at risk on the roads in your country? It could be the same answer as you gave to the first one, if you like, but maybe this prompts a different answer, a different way of thinking about it. Who is most at risk?
Okay, so Judy, similarly, motorcyclists are mentioned, elderly and people with disabilities. Pedestrians, lots of mentioned pedestrians. Rakeshni has mentioned pedestrians. Abhishek, the same. Young motorcyclists is mentioned here. Watilala has mentioned young and elderly pedestrians. Brent has mentioned that those who are less protected. Pedestrians, young students, Victoria has mentioned there as well. So that's a brief snapshot there.
Good, thank you very much, everybody. I have one more question. How do you know this? So of the group that the group that you mentioned in your response, how do you know that that group is the most vulnerable? Is that a general statement that you are making, or is there some way that you actually can quantify why that particular group or those groups are most at risk? Please.
Judy, that one might take a moment for people to type in, so maybe I suggest move through and I'll interrupt you in a moment.
Sure,
but please, folks, feel free to type in and I'll read out your answers in a moment.
Thank you, Blaise. Good idea. So yes, how do you know that those groups are those groups are most at risk? And we'll come back to talking about vulnerable road user groups towards the end of the presentation. While you're doing that, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the concepts of risk and exposure. They're linked, but they're not the same thing. And so when we talk about exposure on the road, we're talking about exposure to the risk of being harmed. And exposure really relates, as you can see here on the screen, to the extent to which groups or particular parts of the population are likely to be involved in a crash or collision. And that's usually defined in terms of the amount of travel that a particular group or the whole population engages in. So it's their exposure to risk, whereas the concept of risk is used to quantify the level of safety that's related to that level of exposure. And I've put a link there to a document that is a very useful resource for you to see more of a discussion about those two things, particularly in relation to road safety. It comes from our colleagues at SWAV in the Netherlands, the Road Safety Research Centre in the Netherlands. Shall I continue, Blaise?
Let me read out a few of the answers here. Thank you all for putting answers into the Q&A. Samita has mentioned police, hospital and surveillance data. Songrit has mentioned the accident database. We've got the road crash data mentioned. Stats provided by the police, as mentioned here, stats, police reports, and also the media. In fact, the media is mentioned a few times here. Salhana has mentioned this as well, also Joynal as well. So they're the various different answers given, Judy.
Thank you. The media is an interesting one. I'll come back to that point as we progress. Thank you very much, everyone, for your responses. So just taking our thinking back to the topics of exposure and risk. So I mentioned that, exposure is about your exposure to crash involvement. So we know that increased exposure leads to a greater risk of being crash involved. And it also can relate to the amount and type of use. And so people or organizations, government authorities may take steps to limit the exposure to risk. And there are a couple of examples I've given there on the screen. So for commercial drivers, people that are driving heavy vehicles, trucks up and down the major corridors of our countries, they're on the road for a longer period of time, as are bus drivers and taxi drivers. They're on the road and driving on the road probably for a greater length of time than others. And so their exposure to crash involvement is likely to be higher. Young people may also be considered in some countries as driving at high risk times. So their level of exposure to risk may be increased if they're driving in nighttime hours, particularly in relation to alcohol use, which we see in some places. So there are many different ways that we can define and assess levels of exposure. As I mentioned, the distance that's travelled is a common one. It might be the number of kilometres travelled per travel mode, so per motorcycle, per car, per truck, for instance. It may be the distance travelled that a pedestrian might travel, so not necessarily only vehicles, although that's the most common one. If you're looking at exposure for pedestrians, then you'd want to be assessing length of time spent either crossing the road or leading up to intersections, travelling on footpaths, things like that. Traffic volumes and the number of vehicles passing a particular point is often used. Time spent travelling, in other words, time spent in traffic is another one. And when all else fails, the amount of fuel that is used, the petrol or gas that is used in a country, can often be used as a measure of exposure as well. So some of you have already mentioned some of these data sources in response to the questions that I posed to you. So the large crash databases, which are generally based on police investigation records, is one avenue to assess that. Doesn't always contain fully accurate information. Some in-depth crash studies, often done by research institutions, can also be very helpful. Some of you mentioned hospital databases, and oftentimes they may be more complete and contain more information than the police records do. Insurance company databases can also be a very useful source of information and may contain cases that were never reported to police. And then traffic offences, the number of infringements that the police issue, can also give you an understanding of the trends in road user behaviour over time. You can see whether, for instance, helmet wearing infringements are going up or down, if seatbelt infringements are going up or down over time. And so that gives us a nice pattern to understand of what's happening with road user behaviour. Some other data sources, so drilling down into that a little bit more. So traffic volumes often collected for traffic engineering purposes. So that it's common to find them selected for major roads where engineering work is planned and carried out. So motorways, main rural roads, particularly major intersections. I'm sure many of you on this call will be very familiar with recording of traffic volumes. And as I mentioned earlier, where some sources are not available, the amount of fuel consumption that is used in a country can be a proxy measure for the amount of travel that was done if that travel information is not available. National travel surveys is another way to find out about people's travel patterns. So it may be that different types of road users are surveyed. You might want to know more about what car drivers, car passengers, people who are using public transport, pedestrians, motorcyclists, bicycle riders. There are a number of ways that you can find out the number of trips on average per week, for example, that someone makes, the time and the purpose of their trip as well. And then there are things like speed surveys that show the travel speeds, for instance, for different road user groups that are using your networks. And just a note here that high quality exposure data is not readily available in all countries, and that's quite common. So it's often that the per capita or per vehicle basis, the million vehicle kilometres travelled, those kinds of measures are the ones that you see commonly in the literature when people don't have access to some of those other measures. So I just wanted to talk a little bit now about risk perceptions. You don't need to answer this question, just have a think about it. What do road users think about risky road use and their risk of being caught if breaking the traffic laws in your country? Just have a think about that. How do you know what the general population thinks about what is risky? And what do they think about their chances of being detected by police or other enforcement agencies in your country if they are actually breaking the law? And I'm raising this because this will link to our enforcement colleagues from GRSP. The presentation that they will give you later in this module is linked to these topics. So there are a number of ways that you can assess road user perceptions. You may already be involved in that in your work. But if you're not, there are many attitudinal surveys that are conducted. Some governments around the world conduct them on a fairly regular basis, 6-monthly or 12-monthly, so that they can actually track and follow the trends in what people are thinking about, what people's perceptions are about road use, what's risky, and enforcement practices as well. You can ask people how dangerous or risky they think it is to ride a motorcycle without a helmet, for example, how risky they think it is if they're breaking the speed limit. You could ask them about whether they think it's likely that they'll be caught by police. And if they are, do they actually think that they will receive a penalty? Because we know that those kinds of things are the things that can influence whether people break the law or not. And I highlight here as well that you can use some of that information as a guide for messaging in mass media campaigns if you're wanting to inform the public about what is risky. If there's a low proportion of the community who actually thinks that a particular behaviour is risky, then that would be a good guide for what messaging you might want to use in your media campaigns if you're running them. And then perceptions about enforcement and the likelihood of being caught can also be used to guide media campaigns and, importantly, to guide what our police colleagues are doing. And we'll hear more about that later on in the module. I just wanted to flag here, in case you're not familiar with it, there's a multi-country road user attitudinal survey that is undertaken. It's called ESRA. It's an electronic survey of road user attitudes. That's what ESRA stands for. And it's a collaboration of research centres and some road safety institutes. And over time, they collect data from a range of countries, quite a number of countries there. You can see actually at the bottom of the screen over 2 different surveys that they've done. And they're asking people about their previous road using behaviours, what is habitual or what their road using habits are, as well as their attitudes, beliefs, and their perceived norms and values. In other words, what they see as standard practice on the roads in their country and what they think about that. So if you're not familiar with ESRA, I encourage you to have a look at that website. And here's just a snapshot from the front screen of the website when you visit it. You can see the topics here that are covered. And you can also see that they have free webinars that you could join if you wished. I think some of them, there was a series there that finished earlier this year. But the recordings, when last I looked, the recordings are available on the Esra website, freely available if you would like to listen back to any of the webinars that might be on a topic of interest for you. In the last presentation, in the last module, I spent some time talking about the country information that's available from the World Health Organization. And here's another series of country profile information in case you're not familiar with it, just if this is something that may be of use to you, from the Global Road Safety Facility, our colleagues at the World Bank. So they've taken the WHO data and displayed it slightly differently. So here's an example from Cambodia. These are just some screenshots just to show you what is available on various pages. And I've chosen this one because we're talking about risk and exposure to risk. There's a couple of things here that are just very, top level pieces of information that might be useful to you when you're trying to assess who is most at risk. That top one, the red arrow, is describing the ratio of male to female fatalities in a particular age group. And the bottom arrow is describing the different road user groups and the proportions that they make up in the total fatality count. So that bottom chart, the red arrow that's pointing to the blue square for Cambodia, that's pointing to four-wheelers, showing that they make up a large proportion of the fatality rate in that country. So just some resources there for you to make available to you if you are not familiar with that already. So let's move to the topic of vulnerable road users. As I mentioned, our colleagues from Asia Injury Prevention Foundation will spend a lot more time today on this topic, but I just wanted to touch on it briefly. And let's consider this question: who is vulnerable? You don't need to type an answer, but just keep that question in your mind. Who is vulnerable? Are we all vulnerable? Are some of us more vulnerable than others? Well, there are a range of ways that people actually use that phrase or that word, vulnerable road users. And commonly it's the first bullet point that I have there on the screen: people with little or no protection if they happen to be involved in a collision that will apply impact forces to their body. And based on the responses that you gave to the earlier questions, it's very clear that people are fully aware that as humans, as pedestrians, and we are all pedestrians, our bodies are not protected in any way. Also, riders of 2- and 3-wheelers, bicycles, motorcycles, trikes, tuk-tuks, etc., all fall into this category of very limited protection, especially if not wearing a helmet. There's another way to think about vulnerability though, and sometimes it's described in terms of how limited somebody's capability is to perform the task that they're meant to be doing on the road. And here let's think about people who are new motorcycle riders, new licensed drivers, people who are using the road system in a motorized vehicle for the first time. They're not an experienced driver or rider. And so that brings a level of inexperience that the system needs to somehow account for. Older people can also fit into this category. People who have a disability, people who are not able to negotiate the roads and the footpaths as other able-bodied people may be able to. People with a hearing impairment, people who can't see properly. So they have limited capacity to perform the regular task. And then the final one is sometimes used is people who are less resilient if they should experience trauma. There I've listed children, but older people could also fall into that category. There are others. People whose body may not respond as a normal adult, and therefore they're more likely to suffer a more severe injury. So that's a few different ways that people often think about the term vulnerable road user, just for your information. So I've highlighted back to the safe system approach circle. I've highlighted two more aspects here: education and road rules and enforcement. And that's the focus of this module 2, safer road users. But just wanted to point out for you that we understand the importance of educating people about the risks of using the road. But please be aware that education is not going to save everybody. Education alone is not what we're looking for. And commonly, we see governments wanting to spend a lot of money and effort on education without doing anything else, or without doing much more. And at GRSP, we like to always highlight that, yes, it's important to educate people about the risks of using the road, but it shouldn't be seen as a standalone intervention. In other words, it's not the only thing that we need to do. We're going to hear a lot more from our enforcement colleagues about the need for sustained enforcement efforts with education over a long period of time with good resourcing to bring about the desired change. And then before I finish, just a reminder, particularly for those of you that weren't in module 1, if you're looking for more information, particularly about operationalizing the safe system approach, there's an excellent guidance document called Sustainable and Safe that our colleagues at the World Resources Institute and the Global Road Safety Facility published a few years ago. So here are some takeaway points from how developing the safe system approach, taking account of local information, local context is important. And it discusses the application in low and middle income countries, which may be of value to you. And there are some key findings summarised in the document. So using evidence-based measures, talking about the sustainability of that approach, and that importantly, this is not just a high-income country approach, it really is something that is applicable to all income levels. So I encourage you to make that known to you if you're not already familiar with it. And with that, Blaise, I shall end my presentation and hand back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Judy. Before you leave us, though, I wanted to raise a few questions that had come through for you. One was in relation to the insurance data. You mentioned as one of the data sources that can be used to understand risks for road users. Just a few thoughts on kind of how to approach insurance agencies and where you've seen that work well, or any guidance regarding that. The second question is in regards to the ESRA and how countries or people can take that data and perhaps understand how to analyze or interpret. You mentioned the webinars there, but any other ideas? Have two other questions, but I'll leave you with those two and then I'll come back.
Thank you very much for the questions. I'll start with the second one. Yes, I encourage you to visit the ESRA website and take a look at that. But and if your country is not included in the current ESRA data collection, that's fine, no problem. You could get a sense of what other countries are reporting. There's also opportunity for new countries to join the ESRA survey, so that's encouraging as well. But what the information that you can gain from something like ESRA, and it doesn't have to be the ESRA survey, it may be one that your own country runs yourselves. What you get from that is the sense of whether people actually think that the police are enforcing the law, as one example. And so we're talking about, in this module, we're talking about safer road users. We want to know if people understand that there's a law, particularly if a law is new or about to change. It's very useful for you to have a sense of what the community actually believes is happening. And I think the important point to remember is the word perceptions is critical here. It's not necessarily about what is happening. It's about what people believe is happening, because it's their beliefs and perceptions that will ultimately shape their behaviour. And so tapping into attitudinal surveys to help you understand more specifically what people believe will then help you determine what messages you might give. So for example, it may be that the police in your area are actually enforcing speeding laws, let's say. I'll just use speeding as an example. It may be that police are enforcing the law, but that when you survey the community, they don't actually think that that's true. And so it may be that the police need to be more visible in their enforcement to raise the idea amongst the public that they are likely to be caught if they're breaking the law. So it's that kind of information from an attitudinal survey that may be able to assist you in guiding development of messages and interventions in your country. And again, you don't need to rely on the Esra information. You can conduct those surveys yourselves or encourage government agencies to do that. And importantly, do that over time, not just once. If you have the availability to do that more than once, then you can track how things are changing this year, next year, etc. That's really important. Blaise, I think the first question was about approaching insurance agencies. So if you're aware of insurance companies that are interested in improving road safety in your country, then feel welcome to contact them. There are examples. I'm familiar with some insurance agencies. I'm speaking to you from Australia today. There are a number of insurance agencies here, particularly state government insurance bodies, that willingly share information and actively encourage use of that data by researchers, by police, for example, and other parts of government to help them understand what's happening. As I mentioned earlier, particularly the insurance agencies may have crash information that the police do not. Some people report to an insurer, but don't ever report a crash to a police agency. So there may be opportunities to learn more about what's going on in your community. If you're not sure, then I would encourage you to approach the insurance agencies in your city or in your country to get a sense of whether they are willing to share that information or enter into a partnership with you. If you don't ask, then you won't ever know. So I encourage you to make that approach if that's the kind of information that you think might be beneficial to your work. Back to you,
Judy.
Blaise.
Thanks, Judy. Final two questions. Pesindu has asked how the cost of fatalities and serious injuries is estimated for each country. You mentioned this in relation to I think the Global Road Safety Facility report in relation to cost, and also just clarifying estimated fatalities, is that when crash data is not available? And Stanley has mentioned that when it comes to risky, it's not just limited to speed or drink driving. There's also other risks generally. For instance, it might be that taxi drivers might stop in the middle of the road to suddenly pick up passengers. And Stanley's feeling is that traffic regulators maybe sometimes don't address some of these other risky behaviours as much as others. So final two, and just maybe 2 to 3 minutes, Judy.
Thanks, Blaise. Yes, I mean, a brief comment to that. I'll again start with the second one. There are a huge amount of risky behaviours that we see on the road. I'm sure you see them every day when you step out your front door. Travelling the wrong way up a one-way street, riding on the footpath, more than the required number of people in a vehicle. There are all sorts of things. The ones that I mentioned today are just some of the key behavioural risk factors, but you're right, I think the person who raised that point, there are many, many risky behaviours, and it's a matter of, I guess, if with limited enforcement resources, determining where to place those resources to achieve the best outcome. And I think our GRSP enforcement colleagues later in the course will talk about prioritising enforcement activities. We would love for people to obey every law every day, but we all know that doesn't happen. And so how to prioritise to get the best benefit from our enforcement and education resources, as well as our infrastructure resources, it's the ongoing challenge. There's no easy way to answer that question, but thank you for flagging that. And if I understand correctly, Blaise, the other question was about how the cost of road deaths is calculated. Was that it?
The cost, and also the reason we have estimated fatalities, and whether that's because, you know, why we don't just go with what the road crash. So I guess two parts to the question. One is how is cost calculated, and the second is what's the reason for estimated fatalities versus official data.
Okay, I'm probably not the best person to respond authoritatively on costs, but there are a range of factors that behavioural economists and traffic economists use. So there's things like the cost of a life lost, and there's things like disability adjusted life years, so DALYs, DALYS. There's a whole body of literature around the costings of injury and fatality. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to look further into that. It's not my area of expertise, but I'm aware that there are a range of issues that are taken into consideration when valuing or costing the loss of life. And then the second question related to estimates of road deaths rather than actual road deaths. So, I mean, countries do report to the World Health Organization. They do report actual numbers of fatalities every time the WHO asks for information for the global status report, which comes out every 2 or 3 years. But along with that, WHO modelling, the economic modelists also conduct their own estimates, I guess you could call them, of the number of fatalities that they actually think may be occurring. So there are, and that comes to the heart of underreporting of crashes. So a country will publish the number of deaths that occurred in that country in a particular year. And for various reasons that may be underreported. That's a completely huge topic for another day, perhaps. But that's why you'll see reported official figures, and then you'll see estimates of fatality figures as well. I'm sure I haven't done justice to that question with that answer, but back to you, Blaise. Thank you. And thank you everyone for your question.
No problem, Judy, and thanks so much. And I know that as well, our enforcement team will talk probably more to those again on Thursday. So please ensure that you tune in for that. Okay, so thanks so much, Judy, for that. The first part of today's presentations, and I hope everyone enjoyed, and really important just to get that clear picture of how to understand the risks in your country related to safer road users. Okay, so now with that, let's move into the second part of today's webinar, and I'm really delighted to introduce and welcome two speakers from really key organisation working to reduce road trauma in our region. That's the Asia Injury Prevention Foundation. So I'm delighted to welcome Greg Kraft, who's the founder and president of AIPF, and also Jimmy Tang, who's the development and strategic partnerships manager. And I'm really delighted to have AIPF here because, as Dave Shelton mentioned earlier, this course is really about practical examples and implementation. And AIPF are a real leader in our region in terms of taking best practice and putting it into actual action and delivery. So it's fantastic to have their expertise here today to talk to you about those experiences and specific examples from our region. But also I'd like to stress as well the great importance of a range of different stakeholders and actors contributing to our cause. And so being able to welcome a civil society nonprofit organisation who works alongside and also with governments right throughout the region, I think is also really important so that we can see how our efforts can be combined and coordinated to address the horrific toll of road fatalities. So with that, to focus in on vulnerable road users, let me please pass over to Greg and Jimmy. Please, guys, go ahead, share your screen, and over to you.
Thank you, Blaise. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you today, and I'd especially like to thank ADB and GRSP for convening this conference. Everyone's able to gain a useful perspective from our lessons in the field. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge our distinguished representatives who are here on behalf of your respective governments, because your leadership and participation in this conference are critical to success of moving forward. As Blaise said, my name is Greg Kraft, and I'm the founder and president of AIP Foundation. I'm joined by my colleague, Jimmy Tang, who will be presenting on our program, Slow Zones, Safe Zones in Vietnam. I like this visual here. Some traditions never die in Vietnam or Asia. You know, we've all seen a lot of the very emotional and horrific scenes of crashes, but this sums it up well. Some traditions never die, but the children certainly do. Along with that is a picture of a grieving family, which I can't tell you how many times I've seen this in my 30 years. It never hurts to, it never stops hard to see it. Since our founding in 1999, we've been dedicated to reducing road traffic injuries, only in low and middle income countries. I started the organization 22 years ago with the simple mission of protecting vulnerable road users with life-saving interventions. We began our work in Vietnam and have since operations with government, sector, development agencies, and others, many of the countries represented here today. These include Cambodia, China, India, and Thailand. While progress has been made, many of the same issues continue to harm our people. Fatality rates continue to disproportionately impact low and middle across Asia. Substandard helmets, which offer practically no head protection, continue to play, killing and maiming our loved ones. To me, this is unethical as selling fake. Road crashes continue to be the leading cause of death for children and young adults. And these victims are children, our children, who have yet to reach their full potential in life.
Sorry, Greg, sorry to interrupt. Sorry, your network's just a little bit glitchy. Maybe I could suggest just to maybe try turn off the video just to see if that might give us a better connection. But we're just losing a few words here and there. Perhaps
Sure.
just give that a try.
Yeah, click me off if you, are you clicking it off, or Jimmy, can you click me off my video? We'll turn it, there we go.
Go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, I was saying that, you know, it's affecting the street vendors who rely on bicycles, our seniors who need pedestrian-friendly streets to stay active and access theirs. And these groups rely on us to work together to ensure that the next generation of road users kind of hazards that probably are plastic growth. But I've come to know in the field times is supporting our road.
Sorry, Greg. Sorry, your network I think is not great, so you're just dropping in and out. What I might suggest is perhaps to log off and log back on, and maybe Jimmy, perhaps you could just take over for a moment while Greg is jumping on and off, just to hopefully get a better connection. Hope that's okay. If Jimmy, you're able to just cover for a moment.
Sure thing, Blaise. I'm happy to do that. And so as Greg was saying, you know, what we've come to know from our lessons in the field is that oftentimes these solutions to supporting our road users, they don't always have to be so complicated or very costly. For example, we know that the simple act of wearing a helmet can reduce your risk of death by 42%. And we know that a 5% cut in vehicle speed, for example, also minimizes your risk of fatality by 30%. And so the goal that we're all working towards is to reduce the number of road crashes that cost our economies anywhere from 3 to 6% of our annual GDPs. These are funds that should be invested into building safe, sustainable infrastructure, integrating high quality road safety education into our schools, and so many other proactive initiatives, as Judy had mentioned earlier about having a comprehensive approach to improving road safety in our society. And so when AIP Foundation first started, the country was really at a pivotal moment, soon to become one of the fastest growing economies in Southeast Asia. And so as the economy grew, so too did the number of motorists. And with this, the dangers of rapid motorization were apparent. Yet the streets back then were filled with motorists and passengers alike not wearing helmets.
I'm
And
back,
so-
guys.
Okay.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Blaze?
you, Greg.
Yep, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Jimmy. But anyway, I can't remember exactly where I missed part of what you were filling in for, Jimmy. But as you all can see, I think on this particular graph, that the traffic fatalities continued to rise until 27. Was happening, the government was working with international and regional partners like ourselves to assess the current approach to helmet legislation. This didn't happen overnight. It took 8 years, but it's been a huge success. And to support with this work, we collaborated with the government to design and implement research-based helmet safety programs across the country. And after years of this focused collaborative leadership from the government, Vietnam finally compulsory helmet law in 2007. You know, we say that the effects were immediate and that the helmet rates surged over 90%, which they did. But I've never forgotten that I happened to be in Ho Chi Minh City that day and walked out early in the morning expecting maybe there would be, 50 or 60% helmet compliance. I was shocked because actually in Ho Chi Minh City that morning, it was really almost 100%. But overall, it was certainly more get started. In the following year, it was pretty shocking that there was a 24% increase and a 12% decrease. We conducted an assessment with FIA Foundation in 2017, exactly 10 years later, and we found that since the law's passage, there's been an estimated 500,000 head injuries, 15,000 fatalities averted due to the increased helmet use. This has actually gone up considerably even in the past 5 years since then. This amounts to $3.5 billion USD in saved medical costs, lost outputs, and pain and suffering. And it's just one of the many important actions Vietnam taken to save tens of thousands. And it comes as a result of the consistent national levels. I just can't. It's a gear that doesn't work unless we have everybody doing it. Anyway, we've come a long way over the past 2 decades. And, there's still a long way to go. But in the past several years, we've continued to work in partnership with the government and the roads that serve, our most important institutions in the communities, which are schools. So we'll be sharing with you the lessons and key insights that we've gained from this proactive collaborative with the Vietnamese government at all of these levels. And with that, I'd like to reintroduce my colleague, Mr. Jimmy Tang, who will now present details on our program. So thank you all very much.
Thanks so
Jimmy?
much, Greg. Thank you, Greg. And before I begin, I'd like to reintroduce myself as AIP Foundation's Development and Strategic Partnerships Manager. It's an honor to be here today, and I'd like to also thank our organizers for convening this session. As Greg had shared, children continue to face significant risks on our roads. In Vietnam, as you can see in the chart here, road crashes account for the second highest number of deaths for children ages 5 to 14. This also holds true to many other countries in Asia and around the world. And while there are many factors which contribute to this alarming statistic, we see here that speeding is perhaps one of the biggest common contributors. In Vietnam, for example, about 10% of road crashes are caused by speeding. And in addition to that, a survey conducted in 2011 found that 64% of Vietnamese drivers felt it was understandable to drive at speeds above the legal limit. That's more than half of the survey drivers demonstrating the need for us to focus on actions to reduce speed in our communities. And a natural area to prioritize, of course, is to ensure that school zones where all students and road users converge on a daily basis are protected with appropriate speed reduction measures. And so we know that reducing speed can save lives, and that's really what set the framework for our Slow Zone Safe Zones program. Since 2018, we've implemented our Slow Zone Safe Zones program in Gia Lai province, located in the central highlands of Vietnam. Today, I'll share with you the lessons we've learned after completing the first phase of the project. And I'd also like to share that this program was launched in collaboration with the National Traffic Safety Committee, Ministry of Education and Training, local provincial agencies, GRSP, the FIA, and other private sector stakeholders to really explore opportunities for us to reduce injuries and fatalities around schools. Our overall goal, which was partly achieved in 2019, as you'll hear later on in the presentation, was to work together towards reducing speed limits in school zones by demonstrating the effectiveness of the comprehensive and feasible framework of this project. The first phase of this project focused on 5 key activities. The first was to create models of safe school zones by investing in low-cost and sustainable road modifications. We then implemented a regional public awareness campaign to educate the general public on safe driving practices in relation to school zones. For example, this included reducing speed, raising awareness on pedestrian safety, for example. We also developed and piloted a road safety e-curriculum in order to improve the quality of road safety education at our project schools. And in order to pilot reduced speed around our school zones, we worked with the local authorities to monitor and enforce speed during specific hours and timeframes during the project period. And lastly, we collaborated with the local government in order to institutionalize reduced speed in school zones in order to strengthen the current and existing legislation around school zone speed limits. Through the project, we engaged various beneficiary groups, all of whom are key road safety user groups who play a role in promoting safer school zones. This includes more than 25,000 students, 900 teachers, 50,000 parents, 200 plus community members, and 50 representatives from various government agencies. And I'd also like to point out that the photo on the right was taken at one of our project sites. And as you can see here, prior to the interventions, students were walking along roads that had little to no safe pedestrian infrastructure. And I'll go into more detail about the importance of school zone definitions and safe school zones as well. And so what we found at our project sites in Gia Lai province was that beyond the speed limits being too high, many schools also lacked the proper infrastructure to effectively enforce reduced speed. And so the photo you see here was taken at the project site that you saw in the previous photo prior to our program interventions in 2018. And so as you can see here, there was little to no safe pedestrian infrastructure, such as separated sidewalks, school zone signage, speed bumps, or even crosswalks for students to safely cross the road. And so for pedestrians, especially students, the absence of this key infrastructure, especially during rush hour, presents significant risks in their daily commutes. And so we conducted an assessment using the IRAP star rating for schools tool and found that the school received a 2 out of 5 stars when measured for safety. And so I'd also like to highlight that in addition to the infrastructural challenges, at the time this photo was taken, Vietnam had what is referred to as fixed speed limits for roads, depending on the type of road and area the road resides on. And so, for example, because this is a 2-way road in a populated area without any divisions to separate the lanes, the speed limit for trucks and 3 to 4-wheel vehicles was 50 kilometers per hour and 40 kilometers per hour for motorcycles. And so what we actually found was that prior to the interventions, we could record vehicles traveling at 60, sometimes even 70 kilometers per hour. Situations such as this are still so common across Asia, which is why, and around the world, which is why the results of this program truly demonstrate that solving this crisis is possible with committed leadership. And in our school zone modification work, we referenced the model you see here developed by the World Resources Institute, which demonstrates an example of a model safe school zone. And so a school zone is an area that around a school that's identified by school zone signage at the start and end of a zone. And school zones are also created to protect children on their journeys to and from schools at the times and places in which they're often found in large numbers. And so in this case, it would primarily be the pickup and drop off hours of a school day. And so as you can see here, in addition to the speed limit signage, other critical school zone infrastructure includes crosswalks, separated sidewalks, refuge islands if it's a larger road, and other traffic calming infrastructure to remind drivers that children are present and to treat the area with extra care and protection. School zones have existed in many countries for as long as there have been motorized transport and are typically defined and enforced by national, state, and local government policies. For example, in the US, where walking to school is common, school zones are strictly defined to include all streets within a 500-meter radius of the school. And so the photo below is an example of a school zone radius that's defined to include all roads within a 300-meter radius around the school. And so beyond the act of establishing reduced speed for school zones, it's important to take active steps and investments to complement that speed limit with infrastructure and regulations in order to protect our students in their daily journeys. We collaborated with local government to conduct a multi-step process in order to assess and implement the school zone modifications. Our government partners were really the key drivers of this component as they worked with us to establish a technical working committee consisting of the local traffic safety committee, local technical engineers, GRSP provided support as well as other key government partners who all played a key role in moving this progress forward. And so the working committee was responsible for the assessment component, which included developing infrastructure plans for the modifications and also determining recommendations in order for us to seek approval from the Department of Transportation. And so in the context of Vietnam, the DOT really was the key agency responsible for overseeing this type of work. And so once we obtained the DOT's approval, the modifications were constructed based on the customized design plan for each school. And then after the modifications were installed, we conducted a post-assessment with the IRAP Star Rating for Schools tool. And fortunately, all schools which we modified were classified as 5-star roads at the end of the project. And so in addition to the modification assessments, we also conducted observations to measure the impacts that these modifications had on the driving behaviors and walking behaviors of both pedestrians and drivers, which I'll share later on in the presentation. The photo you see here is the same project school from earlier after the infrastructure modifications were installed. And so we focused on key components of the Safe School Zone model by installing infrastructure that promotes reduced speed and pedestrian safety. And so you'll see in the image that we included speed limit signage to clearly warn drivers of the speed limit. We installed school zone signage to note to drivers and pedestrians where a school zone began and ended. And we also included lane markings to reduce head-on collisions and dangerous overtaking, which in the previous chart, as you saw, was a major cause of crashes in Vietnam. And so in addition to that, we also created designated drop-off and parking areas for students and parents to utilize. A challenge that many school zones currently face, especially in countries that don't have clearly established school zone definitions, is that there are typically no uniformly designated drop-off and pickup locations for students, which play a major role both in reducing congestion as well as traffic safety hazards for students in their commutes. And so a post-assessment was conducted with this road, and it's now qualified as a 5-star school. These are additional photos of the speed reduction modifications we installed. And as you can see here, the spaces in which students can safely walk as pedestrians or wait for their parents is clearly separated from the roadside. Furthermore, there's clearly marked road signage and flashing warning signals to notify drivers that they are passing through a school zone area. Other strategies we implemented to reduce speed also include the installation of rumble strips, such as what you see in the top right-hand corner of the slide. There's also speed bumps, which are another traffic calming deterrent as well. And so going back to Judy's point about implementing a comprehensive approach that goes beyond education, beyond the infrastructure and the education components that we implemented, We also implemented a critical public awareness campaign to really equip the public with sufficient knowledge to better understand how to adapt to the new rules or regulations in traffic safety. And so to inform target communities of these changes through the province, we worked with the provincial government and media agencies to develop a communications campaign that was disseminated via Facebook, the national radio, and provincial television channels to really disseminate messaging around reduced speed. And so the photo of the girl in the wheelchair is a screenshot of our television PSA, public service announcement, which was aired on provincial channels over 105 times in 2019. We're really proud to say that this reached over 1.4 million people. And so in order to reach road users within their daily commutes as well, we also worked to install billboards and banners along the roads that led to our project sites. And so the banner you see on the top right-hand corner is an example of a billboard we installed within the community. And another really key part of our public awareness campaign is really making sure that the public is engaged and interacting with the content we put out as well. And so in addition to the public service announcement and the billboard and the radio service announcements as well, we also hosted a national photo competition to encourage families to submit photos that represent their interpretation of safe road behaviors. And so the photo that you see here is a family's interpretation of proper helmet use, for example, but we also received submissions about pedestrian safety and school zone safety as well. And so, these interactive campaigns are a really great way to getting the public to really engage in the messaging that you're putting out into the community as well. And simultaneously, a local police enforcement initiative was organized in order for us to inform residents of the new speed limits and reinforce behavior changes. And so during peak pickup and drop-off hours between April to June and September to December, the local government dedicated traffic police resources directly at the project sites to monitor and enforce speeds of 30 and 40 kilometers per hour. The photo on the bottom left-hand corner is a traffic safety event in which GRSP actually worked with us to donate speed guns to the local traffic police in Zalai province as well. And so that's really been a great benefit to the community there. And so in addition to the enforcement campaigns that were conducted during those specific hours and days, during the hours in which police were not present, speed measurements were also taken to monitor driving speeds. By the end of this campaign, over 6,000 inspections were conducted, which resulted in 195 speed violations being issued to drivers traveling through our project sites. And so what we found was that there really was a significant change in community knowledge about the legal speed limit at our target schools as a result of this coordinated effort and staffing allocation by the traffic police. We conducted a community survey to assess this and found that the percentage of people who could correctly identify the speed limit increased from 16% to 66% on average. And as I previously shared, it really was the commitment of our government partners that's contributed to the success of these interventions. A key factor to this was the interagency working committee that was responsible for the coordination, the insights, and approvals needed to implement the project. And so in the case of this Slow Zone Safe Zones project, the working committee included the local traffic safety committee, the Department of Education and Training, provincial police, city police, and local Bureau of Education and Training. And so each partner had a key role in moving project activities forward, such as the support of the traffic police, as I had referenced earlier, as well as the coordination with the traffic safety committee to advise and make recommendations for the school zone modifications. I would say that interagency committees such as this working committee are really key to moving projects forward in an efficient manner. And this is especially the case when there are projects which require various agency inputs and approvals. This is something that's not only allowed our team to maintain open dialogue with our partners, it's also been a great platform for the agencies to communicate with one another as well and open up the space for collaboration. As I previously shared, in certain contexts, the concept of fixed speed limits may not always be enough. And so during the reduced speed enforcement campaign, we collected key insights and data demonstrating the effectiveness of reduced speed at promoting safer school zones. These results at the local level were made possible by the coordination and leadership of our government partners, who not only made the decision to reduce speed limits at our project sites, they also allocated funding and resources to help us enforce this campaign. And the results of this were well received by government partners at the national level, who then in 2019 passed hallmark legislation referred to as Circular 31, which now establishes that speed limits should reflect the actual situation and context of a specific road. And so in doing so, this circular essentially created a space for local governments to create what's essentially called a dynamic speed limit. And so a dynamic speed limit, unlike fixed speed limits, is adjustable to the changing situation of a road throughout the day. For example, in a school zone, a dynamic speed limit allows local jurisdictions to reduce speed limits during drop-off and pickup hours during the school day. And drivers, when the school pickup and drop-off hours are not happening, are able to drive at faster, but of course, reasonable speeds outside of those designated hours. And so research has shown that the concept of dynamic speed limits is often well received by both pedestrians and drivers as a middle ground approach in order to take account the varying situations of a road and the types of road users who rely on that road throughout the day. And that's exactly what happened in our target region, with the Zalai Provincial People's Committee passing a decision to reduce speed limits in school zones to 30 and 40 kilometers per hour based on the circular that was passed at the national level. I would say that it's important for each country to take the necessary steps to determine which speed reduction options are best for them. In the case of Vietnam, the government collaborated with stakeholders such as ours to pilot speed reduction measures in school zones. And in addition to our study, the government also incorporated a ministry-level study which researched the scientific basis for a dynamic speed limit in Vietnam. And it was through this study, as well as community data from projects like ours, that the government passed its legislation for dynamic speed limits. I wanted to highlight some key results which came about as a result of this project's interventions and government collaboration. As I had previously shared, the road modification work resulted in all project school roads improving to achieve 5-star ratings. And before interventions, some vehicles were driving as fast as 70 and 80 kilometers per hour, despite the posted speed limits of 50 and 40 kilometers per hour. And what we found was that after the modifications were installed and the speed enforcement campaign ended, speeds at our target schools reduced by as much as 18 to 21 kilometers per hour. And among the reports collected from students, the rate of crashes at our target schools also decreased from 34 to 30%. Following the results of our pilot program, we're really proud to say that the local traffic safety committee has also made the decision to allocate funding towards improving infrastructure at the remaining primary schools in the city through low-cost modifications. We've also been informed that they also plan to pilot this model to secondary schools as well. And so, as you can see, these reforms are possible and do not always carry the heavy price tag that we may assume they do. Most importantly, these changes can mean the difference between life and death for our students. I'd also like to take a moment to highlight some of the challenges we experienced during this implementation. The first challenge we needed to address was the limited evidence base for speed reduction in school zones in the Vietnamese context. In addition to there never being a speed limit of 30 kilometers per hour in the schools within our target community, there also was no specific mandate for reducing speed in schools explicitly written in the traffic laws at the time. Fortunately, the support we received from our national and government partners in implementing this project gave us the appropriate resources and approvals in order to pilot speed reduction and collect evidence. Furthermore, the support we received from our international partners, such as GRSP, allowed us to organize capacity building workshops to share best practices with the government around speed reduction and enforcement. Another initial challenge was the lack of adequate resources to effectively staff and enforce the speed reduction efforts. And I would say that as with most regulations, if there's a lack of adequate targeted financing to support that regulation, most likely the enforcement of that law will be very weak. And so initially, a barrier we faced to piloting this reduced speed was that there simply wasn't enough police presence to consistently monitor that speed. The evidence we've collected through our police campaign shows that targeted enforcement works and that local traffic agencies should have enforcement plans that take into account a variety of factors, such as peak hours, and specialized areas, such as school zones, in order to effectively enforce the law in high-risk areas. Following the pilot speed enforcement campaign and the passage of the local decision to officially reduce speed, we're really happy to see that there have been significant changes in the driving behaviors at our target sites. And so a final challenge we faced, which is quite common regardless of a country's level of development, were the delays brought about as a result of the approval processes for us to implement our activities. While we received early support from our partners for the project, the permitting process alone took about 6 months for us to acquire in order to complete our modifications. And this was partly influenced by the fact that there was no official mandate at the time to reduce speed limit, which meant more time needed for the government to conduct internal reviews before coming back to us. And so the lesson learned here is that there really needs to be targeted leadership, someone really willing to take the reins and drive progress forward inside your institutions in order for this progress to be made. Nonetheless, following this approval, we were able to complete the modifications and conduct our post-assessment activities very smoothly. The second phase of our project is currently underway and will be implemented into 2022. And the first phase of our project focused primarily on reducing speed in school zones, which we were able to achieve through the passage of Circular 31. The second phase of our project will focus on a more comprehensive view of school zone safety by working with our government partners to establish what's referred to as an official school zone definition. As I previously shared, the local government has committed funding to modifying the remaining primary schools in the city. And so we will be collaborating with them to ensure that these modifications are comprehensive so that all of these schools can achieve higher star ratings according to the Star Rating for Schools tool. Furthermore, we'll continue to pilot the tests of our e-curriculum by expanding the pilot area to include other regions across Vietnam in order for the curriculum to be nationally applicable. And as I previously shared, school zone definitions are critical to ensuring that school developments are designed with a minimum set of safety infrastructure and road planning to provide the greatest level of protection to students. And so we'll be working with our local partners to really see how we can strengthen legislation around this area as well. I'd like to close off by highlighting some key takeaways that my team wanted to share today. And the first takeaway, which contributed to the positive results of our interventions, was the comprehensive design of this project. As I previously shared, the concept of school zone safety is so much more than just reducing speed in schools. It really is a comprehensive concept that requires an educated community that understands safe driving and pedestrian behaviors. It also includes well-designed infrastructure that will minimize the dangers brought about by unsafe driving. And furthermore, it's also about creating the appropriate regulatory and enforcement environment that motivates drivers to abide by the law. This is done both by institutionalizing effective education and infrastructure, but it's also about allocating the appropriate resources to enforce the law and to making sure that these laws are effectively resourced. The next takeaway, which was key to our project, was the proactive and committed leadership of our government partners. I can't emphasize this enough. It really was our government partners at the local level who were not only supportive of our interventions, they also played a key role in moving activities forward. This was either through their participation in the working committee, to their decisive actions to pass legislation and allocating resources to support our efforts. And lastly, we want to emphasize a key statistic that we know has the potential to save thousands, if not millions of lives, if all countries adopted this measure. And that is that 30 km/h speed limits in school zones are an effective deterrent to reducing road crash fatalities and injuries. While there are many contributing factors to pedestrian-involved crashes in schools, speed by far is a leading risk factor that everyone in this group can take action on today based on the global evidence that exists. We hope more countries follow suit in taking proactive measures for the safety of our students in order to better understand what we can do to improve the safety of school zones in each of our respective jurisdictions. Thank you so much for your time and attention. My email is here if you'd like to get in touch or learn more about our organization. But aside from that, really thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jimmy, and thanks, Greg. Fantastic presentation. And as I mentioned right at the top, so important to get such practical examples of interventions that work and we can clearly see that impact. We're almost out of time, but yes, just a few questions that have come through, if I may, and comments as well. Brent had mentioned that he's an ambulance officer and can testify to the incredible difference attending a motorcycle crash has now that helmets are compulsory in Rarotonga. So there's a comment there just about emphasizing what Greg had mentioned earlier about the importance of the use of helmets, and just that difference then when a crash does occur on the outcome in that situation. However, Brent also mentioned there that there's a lack of policing is a massive problem, and that often the excuse here is a lack of budget. Brent's question is any ideas on how to overcome this? I would say, Brent, we will have a specific session on Thursday focusing on enforcement. But perhaps at the same time, Greg or Jimmy, you might like to address how you as AIPF had encouraged police to, I guess, focus more attention on road safety, but also perhaps about focusing on the right types of issues to enforce. So that's the first question. And the second was a question from Hojen Sim, who asked about the definition of a radius around a school zone. I have one more question after that, but maybe I'll just ask those two first. So Jimmy, Greg, over to you on those two.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Blaise. I'll go ahead and answer the question about how we can support police and the idea of in situations when there's a lack of budget around raising awareness on helmet safety. And so what I would say is that the work that it takes towards improving helmet safety in the community, it doesn't just rely on the police. Of course, in order to ensure that the police can effectively enforce the law, we need to make sure that there's proper education to the police, enough police trainings available so that they can identify a quality helmet or a helmet that meets the country's national standard. And so, that's one angle in which we need to be helping the police and supporting police. But another angle that we want to emphasize is the public awareness raising component. And so, what we see in a lot of our program countries is that there are road users who aren't necessarily wearing helmets because it protects their heads. We see road users who are wearing helmets that are unsafe just so that it abides by the law of, wearing a helmet. And so this really is a cross-sector effort that is required, not just from the government perspective in terms of providing education to the community about safe helmet wearing. It's also about working with the nonprofit sector, with schools, with the private sector to really disseminating this key message and changing the public's perceptions and attitudes towards helmet wearing. I would say that, in most countries, there will always be an issue of whether there's enough police presence in the community, just because it's, quite impossible to having police present on every jurisdiction at once, And so in order to combat that risk, we really need to be doing a comprehensive approach and working with stakeholders to making sure that we approach these constituents and beneficiaries from diverse perspectives. And so in terms of, Blaise, was the second question about the radius of a safe school zone, or? Exactly.
Yes, the radius. And then actually, while I'm coming back here, Jimmy, two more to add in. So yes, one is around how to understand what a school zone is and that radius. Sue Kim has asked whether you're able to share any more information about the community curriculum that you use. And Brent has just clarified, he's talking more generally around police present enforcement. As I mentioned, Brent, we'll talk more on that on Thursday. But yes, school radius, Jimmy, and also about a little bit more about the community curriculum that you mentioned earlier. Okay, perfect. Thanks so much, Blaise. The radius of a school zone is defined as the meters, or the distance from a school gate on each side of the school gate on the road that's adjacent to that street. And so in the slide that I showed you earlier, the graphic showed that the school zone would be the 300 meters from the school's gate to each side of that road. I hope that answers that question. And the question regarding the e-curriculum, this is an e-curriculum that we're developing in collaboration with all of our project stakeholders to really provide a high quality road safety education experience for students. And so that wasn't something that I was able to focus on as much within this presentation, but essentially we're working to develop this curriculum that we hope can become nationally applicable.
We also have resources available on our website and news items that provide more information on the curriculum itself. But essentially, it's a primary school curriculum that provides comprehensive topics to primary school students on topics including how to safely cross the road and speeding, for example, distracted driving. There's many different topics that are discussed within this curriculum.
Great, thank you so much, Jimmy and Greg. Fantastic presentation, and like they mentioned, AIPF certainly happy for you to get in touch. Their presentation will be shared with you, so their contact details are there, and yeah, please do keep the conversation going, and I'm sure they would certainly love to hear from you with any further questions or queries. Okay, I'm just going to then just finish up for today by reiterating the rest of this particular module. I'll just share my screen here. Okay, so we'll be back here again on Thursday, same time, which is 2:30 p.m. Manila time, for 2 more sessions focusing on safer road users. We'll, as I mentioned, hear much more about effective enforcement, and then I guess the pairing of that with strategic communications and road safety education. So this will be at the same time, 2:30 p.m. on Thursday. And then on Thursday, we'll then finish, but I will provide more information regarding the homework assignment. On Monday, the 4th of October, we'll then have a practical session, again, focusing on understanding approaches to addressing safer road users. And we will then give you your assignment. At that point, you'll have some time to complete that over about 10 days, and we'll finish up on the 21st of October with our final session talking through that assignment. But yes, we'll be back here again on Thursday, same time for the next 2 sessions. So I do hope you enjoyed our presentations today. A big thanks, of course, to Dave Cliff and Dave Shelton for their welcomes, to Dr. Judy Flyder for her presentation, and to Greg Kraft and Jimmy Tang from AIPF for theirs. Have a wonderful afternoon and evening. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you back here on Thursday. Thank you.